today's computer. Did you also validate that somewhere on your side it should say recording with a red dot?
Yes, recording is confirmed.
All right, just wanted to validate. Okay, excellent. So let me kick off, and it will be recorded. So we're trying to record this for those people that either were not able to join by planning or didn't make it the last minute. Thank you all for joining. This is a large-scale Scrum of New York City meetup, a virtual event. I will probably spend very little time, no time, reintroducing myself. I have organized the event, and I try to attract as many people with relevant speaking capabilities as much as I can. So that's going to be just that. If you have any needs for direct feedback or direct discussions, I'm very easily accessible. You can either do it through email, gg_nyc@yahoo.com, LinkedIn, my site, also the meetup itself for those that are new to this and maybe just got Zoom link but no meetup page at your disposal. Please at your disposal. Please take a look here. Also, my Slack channel is free. Feel free to join, as well as I teach weekly. So if you are interested in large-scale Scrum learning, you can pick it up as well from the site. I am going to do an immediate deep dive into the subject. This way we'll save a few minutes towards the end, so no intros needed. We will just go right into the subject. So this discussion is about undone work and undone departments. And this may sound a little odd, or sometimes I even hear this is kind of facetious. This is ironic. What do you mean by undone department? So we'll get to it in a few minutes. But before we touch upon the actual subject, I wanted to pave some road a little bit, so it's a bit of a refresher to everyone. So we'll start with the concept of a team in Scrum, and in Scrum. We're talking about one team Scrum. We're not talking about scaling organizational, organizations that are trying to scale up agility. None of that just yet. We're talking about basic Scrum, one team Scrum with one product owner, one product backlog, with customer-centric development, with teams being stable, long-lived, cross-functional, being able to touch multiple components, and obviously being able to deliver at the end of every sprint something that is tangible, shippable, meaningful, potentially sellable. So first, let's make sure we get this out of the way. This is basic Scrum. And going along the same lines, let's stress what a team is versus a fake team is. Now, this pertains to Scrum, and explicitly, and I'm trying to make this into an explicit point, in large-scale Scrum, cannot speak of the same in terms of other scaling frameworks or methodologies or operating models. Those are the words we often use. I'm explicitly referring to Scrum and large-scale Scrum, where a team is meant to be effectively, it's a group of people really, but it's explicitly called a team because the team is meant to be stable, meaning they stay together for a long time, work on features for a long time. It is not a temporary group that is created on demand for a temporary project. The whole team shares responsibility. It is really not about individual responsibility of people all on their part based on specialty. And probably what's important to notice here is this. Some HR-related matters really need to be taken into consideration for this not to become a bottleneck. So I'm kind of digressing a little bit, just a little bit. Take a look at this book, and there are many other books that speak to this matter. Now, we're talking about self-managed teams, teams that are able to do to give themselves direction, self-directed teams, not PM-controlled work where project managers are responsible for assigning work. Simple, flattened organizations, no matrix structures, as opposed to matrix organizational structures that take people from resource pools. full dedication, not to be confused with other means of disseminating knowledge. And we, in fact, in large scale Scrum, we have coined this really well. Not a part of this conversation, not just yet at least, but we definitely want to stress the importance of 100% team assignment, as opposed to resource sharing and part-time membership. Responsible teams, not single function roles, focus on customer, not on documentation contracts, teams that understand requirements, not reliant on dedicated analysts that are responsible for translation and interpretation, 100% team ownership, inspection, and adaptation, as opposed to best practices. And we've seen this aplenty out there, where companies end up writing prescriptive manuals or best practices or cookbooks that are almost thousands of pages, wiki pages, that talk about what a team should look like, completely trivializing the essence of Scrum and feature-centric development. Last but not least, well understood existing simple roles and processes, as opposed to many vaguely defined roles with very few responsibilities per role. Why is this all important? Because this is kind of a precursor to discuss the most important matter, the most important subject of today's session. Now, one more thing need to be actually a few more things need to be stressed here. With regards to a team, we want teams that are able to not only self-manage but also self-design. And if we look at this matrix, teams that are able to self-manage and self-design are also expected to do many more things than just execute on individual tasks assigned to them by individual managers. Again, an important precursor for our upcoming conversation about undone work. Again, in the same stream of discussion, we want to look at feature teams that are more mature in terms of cross-functionality and in terms of technology domain that they're able to perform in. And of course, these feature teams are not just a nirvana state, which would be at the top right corner. They're somewhere above and beyond single skill set, single component teams. So again, everything we are going to talk about in terms of undone work rests on the fact that it is really the feature team that we are going after. If we look at these two dimensions, customer dimension versus technology dimension, again, a feature team should be positioned somewhere in upper left, right quadrant, where we have individuals that are specialized in customer dimension, but also have good technology expertise. So we want to have both. Whereas component teams, they have very little customer understanding with a lot of technology expertise, versus analyst teams, the opposite. With feature teams, they have the best of both worlds, and that's what we want in Scrum, in large-scale Scrum. And when we talk about done versus undone departments, this is going to come into play. Quick compare and contrast of two types of teams: component teams on the left-hand side, and feature teams on the right-hand side. So starting with the component team on the left-hand side, obviously you can see that only one system component can be touched by one team. And in between, there's a lot of coordination, a lot of orchestration, a lot of dependency resolution that needs to take place. What does it typically lead to? Orchestrators, people that go in between, like first line managers or integration managers. Again, excessive overburden organizational structure. From a standpoint of a product owner, from a standpoint of a customer, only maybe T1 is able to work in a customer-centric way, customer-centric fashion based on business priorities. For example, Team C will not be able to work that way. They will be working on, for example, item number four. And although it may seem like they're working on the first thing that they're able to work on, from a standpoint of a buying customer, from a standpoint of a product owner, this is not the highest priority. Again, it will come it will become very handy, this understanding, just in a couple of slides. With the feature team structure, organizational structure, we have a different situation. Every team is able to touch more than one component. In this case, with a system that is relatively simple, all three components. And at any point in time, a product owner will be comfortable knowing that any of the teams will be able to touch any of the backlog items in the order of priority. Okay, that's a critical difference. That's an important difference to see. And of course, if we look at the component team closer, then we will realize that not only do we need a feature manager who is responsible for coordination, we are actually focused on individuals as opposed to work. We're trying to manage and watch the baton, not the runner, not the baton. And from a product development perspective, customer-centric perspective, we want to watch the baton, not the runner. Of course, with that, there will be an increased delay and, lots of handoffs and multitasking, and that just translates into muda, into waste. Also, it's almost pretty much guaranteed that with this kind of development, the teams will not be able to concentrate to focus on customer value. Why? Because well, each team works on a component. Most likely it's a very technical item, and they're probably going to be very locally optimized in their own way, working very hard in their own dimension. But from a standpoint of a buying customer, and I refer to a product owner or anyone who represents business as a buying customer, essentially they're buying, they're receiving business value from developers. These guys will be getting, just an IOU as opposed to a cross-component cutting finished feature. At the same time, a feature team will always be able to work on a highest feature, on a highest value feature from a standpoint of a product owner. And this is all dependent on modern open source tools and practices such as test-driven development, CI/CD pipeline, also unit testing, coverage, stuff that is makes a good technology team an excellent team because they have these technical capabilities in place. So this is, of course, system optimization. Is it really all important? Is it all really relevant to our discussion of done versus undone work? Yes. You will see in a minute why. And just to add a few more flavor, a little more flavor to this, check this out, and most likely you've seen this, you've heard of this. This is an example of so-called scrumming, right? But you do this by function specialty, single function specialty, an analyst sprint. And when they do it, we can only ask a question, what do designers and implementers do? What do developers do when analysts are sprinting? When designers are designing, when they are architecting the system, what do analysts do? What do developers do? Then, of course, what are testers going to do? And this is almost like a cascading rolling wave. We can always be sure that at no point in time, people are sitting idle and doing nothing. They're doing something. This is what we refer to as local optimization. They're local optimized to do the best they can, only within the domain they're able to work on. So whereas developers might be developing in sprints 3 to 5 on a set of features, developing a set of features, analysts are on to something else, analyzing things that are probably not even important to a product owner just yet. So this is just almost like a mini waterfall. So imagine this now 3 component teams working in a component-centric way, integrating very late in the game with a lot of code being shipped to a system tester all at once in a one big batch. Of course, this is very prone to discovering bugs and other problems. Now, this is, if we really come to this head on to this problem and address it and can it, this is a waterfall within waterfall, dressed up as Scrum. Waterfall within waterfall. Why? Because this is sequential development. This requires lots of integration. So this is waterfall. And it's also within the waterfall, a bigger schema where you have single component development within single function specialty, so-called Scrum. So of course, this is not a very agile way of working. Uh, Now let's get to this point of technical excellence and potentially shippable product. We are bringing up the subject that is just a good old Scrum, right? This is not even a large scale Scrum. This isn't about scale, and this is a single team being responsible for their own shipment at the end of every sprint. Now, in order to get to done, in order to get to a fully shippable product state, a team must cover various facets, various dimensions in product development, in product testing, in product architecture. So all of these are typically, you know, the list could be bigger or smaller, but these are expected things from any team that calls itself a Scrum team and claims that they're able to deliver at the end of every sprint. Now, what does it really mean? It means that if a team does not have a well-defined definition of done, that then they cannot really validate themselves. They cannot validate themselves for their own ability to deliver a shippable product increment to a client. Now, let's play out this scenario just for the sake of, just call it for the sake of visualization, right? Imagine you have a team that started sprinting at one point of time in the past, and it keeps sprinting and sprinting and sprinting. And at the end of every sprint, it has something that isn't shippable just yet. So they've done the best they could as per their existing definition of done. But at the same time, they are not able to ship. So the natural question comes, what happens then? Well, they move on to the next sprint as per priorities and as per planning. And of course, the product owner is tightly in the loop. They all on the same page in terms of priorities. So they are onto something else developing, whereas they are onto something else developing and testing. There is something that's still lingering behind, and this is something is referred to as undone work. Now, think of it this way: you are, racing a car, right? And you have maybe it's not a good analogy. You're doing something around the house. You're trying to clean the house, every room by room. And in every room, your definition of done is, maybe sweeping the floor, mopping the floor, washing windows, but not taking out garbage. So effectively, what you end up doing, you're going from room to room to room, you're doing all this support work, all this maintenance, cleanup work, but in every room, you remain a big basket or a big bag of garbage. So someone is kind of responsible to clean this out. Otherwise, you cannot deliver a room to either to your roommate or your family member, whoever. But at least, so then after you go this entire sprint, this entire cycle of multiple sprints of multiple rooms, you have to clean your own laundry. You have to clean your own mess. So you have to go back to those rooms and take out all the garbage. Now, oftentimes this is referred to as release sprint, or hardening sprint, or a stabilization sprint, or I cannot ship to production yet sprint, right? Now, this is probably one of the least problem. It is a problematic situation we're in, but this is probably one of the least problematic situations because at least you own your own work. So you will come back to this work after X number of sprints, and you will clean it, and you will fix your own mess. Now, of course, the person here, the lady with the a letter's PO, the product owner, at one point in time says, "I want to ship," and this is when you get that alarm goes off. Oh my God, we can't ship just yet. So you start running back. You run back to those rooms that have garbage bags that was not taken out, and now you're responsible for cleaning your own mess. Same thing happens with undone work in Scrum development. You end up accumulating these clouds of undone work, gets accumulated more and more and more, and effectively, when someone wants to ship, they think you're sprinting, they think you are able to ship, But the answer is you cannot. The truth of the matter is you cannot. So this is undone lingering work that is just not feasible. It's not supportive of adaptive, agile ways of working. So let's just make it very clear. A release sprint is not a good thing. It's a necessary evil because you still have undone work. You have this undone, lingering, unfinished set of activities that you cannot perform as a part of your sprint. It could be very well be an organizational problem, not a skill set or technology expertise problem of a given team. An organizational design problem, and I will explain in a minute what it means, really. So imagine another scenario. You are delivering every sprint something that is still not shippable, but you actually feel much more comfortable. You're not responsible for your own shipment. You're not responsible for doing your own work, for finishing your own work. And when the product owner says, I am willing to ship, I'm ready to ship, well, definitely you can't say, yes, I can't ship because you're not ready, but it is no longer your problem. Now it becomes the problem of an undone department. An undone department, of course, it's somewhat ironic title, ironic name. This could be called something else in your organization. But this is the organizational structure that is responsible for cleaning the mess. I call it a mess because from a standpoint of development practices, very often it is a mess. Bug fixing, integrating, from individual development environments into a shared repository of some sort of like maybe head of a trunk, and then discovering a bunch of bugs and problems. So someone is responsible for this, but it's not you anymore. You being a team, it is someone else. So this undone department has full accountability for it. Whereas they are onto taking up your unfinished work and running with it, your team is on to something else. So people that have created these issues in the first place are no longer people that are responsible for those issues. This is referred as pipelining to undone department. Now, the goodness here, and of course, if you can argue what's good about that. The goodness here is that at least it is done incrementally. The undone department doesn't get overwhelmed, overloaded all at once. At the end of every sprint, you ship your features, you ship your code, and you pass it on to another team, or maybe the whole organizational structure is designed for it, right? So this pipeline, I mean, definitely it's even worse than the previous case. This is at least you own your own stuff. In this case, you have another cleaning crew that actually follows your crew as you clean each room. In my analogy, room by room, someone comes behind you and actually takes out this garbage. So you're not responsible for it; they are. And the third option would be this. So you got a bunch of undone work being discovered. So you discover undone work at the end of every sprint. And when your product owner says, I want to ship, you still cannot ship. You still cannot ship because still your work was shipped to undone department. However, and by the way, in your organization, it could be called something else. And I just don't know what it's called in your organization. The problem here is actually exacerbated. It's even more critical because now the undone department gets overwhelmed with this huge cloud of undone work. So at least when you pipeline it to them gradually, they have an idea of what they're getting. But when you ship it to them in one big batch, it is very hard to predict what it will take them to actually clean this all up and get it to shippable. So here is the risk amplified from little to bigger to low risk. I mean, I wouldn't say that undone work that you do by yourself is a low risk. It's pretty high risk. To high, to even higher, to the highest. So this is the highest risk you can probably expect organizationally. And of course, I mentioned before, it may not be necessarily the team's problem. In fact, each team could be very capable of doing work that is necessary, that is needed to get this work to fully done. Because of organizational structure and domains of control and sphere of influence, It is by organizational design that you're not able to do it. So the risk aspect of it is pretty clear, right? So you are not allowed. Sometimes you just can because you don't have enough skills, but more often than not, you're not allowed to finish this work and actually get it to production. Because my suspicion is that if you really wanted to procure, to attain necessary intellectual asset, necessary skills to be able to ship, you could. But it's really not because of skill source scarcity, so to speak. It is about sphere of control. Now, imagine this. If you had just one Scrum team being challenged with this, and this is just something that we need to understand before we make our next point. Just because you have multiple teams, multiple teams, more than one for sure, if you just copy paste them, Control C, Control V, organizationally, you will not be really scaling your agility. This isn't scaling. This is what's sometimes referred to as copy pasting. You take an existing organizational structure, an existing group, most likely a component team, and you now call it a Scrum team. And it's very easy to do because you don't have to change much, right? It is a wrong way to do it. It's really not Scrum. It is a component-centric development in Scrum close. But now you have so many different component teams. So it's so easy to put them on Scrum events. It's so easy to assign a Scrum Master, which is in fact counterintuitive and against, against what Scrum recommends. It is so easy to put them on some electronic tool. It is so easy to cherry pick a technical lead from the development side of the house and call them a product owner. That's pretty straightforward. That's pretty easy. First of all, it's not Scrum on a single team basis, but also copy pasting this, it's most definitely not scaling. But now, why is this important, right? It is important is because each one of these teams, as per the previous slide, is going to have so many challenges integrating their work with work of other teams in terms of integrating, in terms of integration testing, regression testing, and other types of testing, so that you are really amplifying your problem, not in a linear, but in a superlinear fashion. So first of all, let's make sure we understand this isn't scaling. Just because you have 50 so-called Scrum teams running within the same department and sitting in Jira or some other tool of record, this isn't really scaling. Scaling has a very specific meaning where you amplify capability of a single team to deliver outcome to a buying customer in a very product-centric, customer-centric way. So that's important to understand. Now, what would happen to undone work with fake scaling? Another important aspect. What we just discussed a few slides ago could seem and could look pretty, discouraging. Oh my God, what are we up against? We're up against a single team not being able to deliver and have so much undone work accumulated. Now imagine you are in a situation where you have many teams. So this undone department for one team is going to exponentially grow into an undone department within the organization that has many teams. So we're not talking about, so if you got one person responsible for undone work who is outside of a Scrum team, then if you have 3 teams, it's going to be 3 people, most likely. And this is by org design and lots of experimentation and research. It will be probably 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 people. And this, of course, is going to lead to local optimization. What is local optimization? Local optimization is when an organizational structure, a team, a group, an individual are locally optimized to do the best they can, to perpetuate their own work. So what does it really mean? It means that as our undone departments work, there will be more and more need to feed them with work. And as work grows, so will the department. And as the department grows, they will ask for more and more work. So this is a vicious cycle of feeding and feeding and feeding upon itself. Apologies. So the recommendation would be, a very strong recommendation would be to gradually, probably not overnight, not immediately, to remove undone department. To remove undone department by just, there are things you could do to minimize work that is undone after your team has gone through a series of iterations. And this is how it could look. This is probably, should be intuitive enough to visualize this. Everything required to deliver as a potential shippable product increment is described by this blue block. Now, as you are going through your initial sprinting, just consider your definition of done being very light and inclusive only, let's say, unit testing, right? That's your current definition of done. And of course, whatever is remaining on the right-hand side would be undone work. Undone work is effectively what prevents you as a team from shipping at the end of the sprint. In 5 sprints, the goal would be to expand your definition of done to embrace UAT, UAT as a part of the definition of done. Great. So as you expand your definition of done, your definition of your definition of undone will shrink naturally, because there's so much you need to do, right? Altogether, from soup to nuts, from concept to cash. And if you are expanding your doneness, you're going to be shrinking your undoneness. Let's just say by year end, your goal would be to expand it to performance testing as well. And of course, your definition of done will be even smaller. Moving on to the 2-year goal of definition of done, your definition of done will become even smaller. Okay? So that's really a way to think of your definition of done expansion. And if you look at the, one slide too fast, if you look at the gradual maturity of your definition of done as your teams go through, through iterations one by one, as you expand your definition of done, you will be shrinking your definition of undone. Now, how is this really possible? And this is where I'm going to diverge a little bit from the undone department discussion into how this is actually addressed in large-scale Scrum. For example, okay, there are some dimensions, there are some channels of information flow, there are some channels of communication that we strongly encourage, that we strongly recommend in large-scale Scrum that help us with expanding our definition of done. And of course, this conversation would be much longer if we had to look into how teams in large-scale Scrum actually refine their backlog and into planning on point. It isn't by Scrum of Scrum, Scrum of Scrum of Scrum, Scrum of Scrum of Scrums, congregation and coordination with the use of external people. It is very intimate, in a very informal way, with teams doing this together, side by side, in a very promiscuous way. Just like we have pair programming, we call it sometimes promiscuous programming. We have promiscuous backlog refinement and sprint planning. So with that, there was a lot of cross-pollination with knowledge. And as you cross-pollinate with knowledge, as we all know, people learn and people teach at the same time. With that, more teams gain more capabilities to get work from an undone state to done state. But just to stress a few other points here, in large-scale Scrum, we explicitly recommend to leverage the technique, the technique. It's called developer traveler. It's really not a technique. Let me rephrase that. It's a way to learn and the way to teach others. It's the teaching mechanism where Team A that has, let's say, a lot of expertise in CI/CD pipelining sends off their own developer onto Team B or C for a couple of sprints to cross-pollinate, to pollinate with knowledge, maybe through pair programming, maybe through mop programming, and by doing so, teach them how to do it. And then this person comes back to their own team, of course, and starts working on their own team. This is one of the ways to disseminate knowledge. Of course, you can say, oh my God, what's going to happen in team one? Their velocity is going to drop. So what? You got 2 or 3 other teams that are going to pick up this knowledge. In a few sprints, it will just go up, right? Yeah, velocity maybe is important for some people. It is important maybe, but it's not at single team level. We care about less product group overall velocity, if anything. And of course, velocity is just an outcome. It's just an output. We care about outcome so much more than output. Another way, another key, another effective way, I should say, to shrink definition of done by educating and learning and teaching is by scouting. So let's say my team A has doesn't have enough skill set in backend Java development or in Oracle database, for example. Well, we're going to take one of our people and send us as a scout to sneak up on the other team within less product group to learn how they do it. So this person will come back and bring this important knowledge to our team. Component mentors is a super important way to do this. A component mentor is used to be a component owner or some sort of a technical lead or someone who was very skilled and very experienced with hands-on development and with hands-on work. And this person would be now made into a mentor as opposed to a doer. They will be teaching others how to touch that specific component. Now think of undone work now. If your organization today has undone departments or undone teams or undone work specialists, but perhaps these people should fall back into teams and or become undone work mentors, component mentors, to teach others how to do the same. So there was less of bottlenecking and dependencies. Okay? And of course, last but not least here, the notion of a community is pretty important. The notion of a community is pretty important here because through those horizontal organizational structures, we do a lot of functional learning. We cross-pollinate with knowledge. Very important. Very important to understand that cross-pollinating with knowledge is going to help you shrink your definition of done, because oftentimes people just don't know how to do work, and through functional learning communities, they will pick up this knowledge and they can come back and actually now implement this knowledge on their respective teams. Okay, so the net is this: undone work and undone department could be what's referred to as a necessary evil at the moment. However, this is not because with a mandatory evil, because oftentimes you'll this is not credible to have the undone department in existence. It is oftentimes because of organizational constraints and restrictions, and once you lift those, blood starts flowing through your veins and things become much simpler. So undone isn't something that you can remove immediately overnight, perhaps, but this is something you want to try to shrink over time and maybe get to a better state. At least you want, maybe you will never get to null, but at least you can expect yourself to shrink it and make it smaller and make it less of a bottleneck, and bring your team closer to the state, maybe multiple teams if you're doing in large scale Scrum settings, when you bring your teams closer to the point in time when they actually can ship at a very short notice from a product from business. So I'm going to pause for now. I wanted to budget at least some 50 minutes or so for questions, and let's take some questions. Perhaps I'm the only person who is facilitating this, so I may have to go to the chat room. I see there's a lot of in there. All right, I just noticed there's hopefully I'm still audible. I turn it on and off at the moment. Am I still audible?
You are, Gene.
Excellent. Thank you, Pete. Thanks, Arthur. All right, so any questions, folks? I'll be happy to take any questions or If you wish, I can, scan, I can skim through the Zoom group chat. I don't see any questions. I see just people exchanging, which is always great. Some API teams do dependencies with upstream teams have to be remain as. So Shrikant, let me just try to respond to that. There's more questions. Just let me respond to that. So this is a very good example when we say dependencies are created by organizational design. Component-centric development is by organizational design that exists today. Absolutely, this cannot be minimized. This cannot be trivialized as a problem. Yes, for instance, if an API team is an external, standalone, component-centric component team that is responsible for this work, then of course there will be hard external dependencies. Now, on point, and that's an important point to make, in large-scale Scrum, for example, there is no concept of hard internal dependencies. There are great opportunities for teams to work together. And because teams go through backlog refinement session together and through planning together, they don't really have a problem of hard dependencies. They just know how to plan around it. And if they expect to be codependent in any way, they make this into an opportunity to work together, as opposed to a red flag, I cannot proceed because John Doe from Team C isn't finished with his work. Okay, that being said, that's large-scale Scrum, of course. In the traditional organizational design that is mostly is component-centric, yes, you will have a hard dependency like this. Then one of the ways to alleviate this is to probably go one level up from the management level that is in charge of this situation and stipulate the problem and explain them why this is problematic and explain why this is problematic from, or not just from org design perspective, but from customer centricity and business value flow perspective. Then what may happen that this expert from an API team that sits outside your existing organizational sphere of jurisdiction influence gets invited onto your team and becomes a part of your team. So again, this isn't an easy switch to turn on or off. It does require some org design discussions with people that are in charge of org design. The rule of thumb, and that's what we recommend in large-scale Scrum, if you are up against a hard wall and if you don't think you can change it, it is most likely not going to be, you're not going to be able to change at this level. Sometimes you need to either make a very strong case so it becomes overly, painfully obvious, or you just need to one level up. Or to look for people that have stakes in the game and are not willing to tolerate systemic dysfunction. So in order to find people that are not willing to tolerate systemic dysfunction, you say follow the money. Follow the money, maybe follow the rev center, or follow where things, where people sponsor. So, and see if you can discuss with them. So the next question was, how do you deal with skeptics? Any stories? I have tons of stories, my own and others, how to deal with in the banking environment. Of course, if you have vendor-driven development, some of these problems could be exacerbated and made much more problematic. This is Leslie Ann from you. Just drop me a note. I'm happy to maybe give you some tips. But you can clearly up against an additional challenge. You have vendor-driven, fixed everything development done by a fixed SOW with vendors that are siloed, and worse, if you have multiple vendors competing for the same SOW with a client, then things just gonna amplify. Problems are gonna amplify. So please reach out. I'll be happy to share with you some more stuff. We end up with undone work because of overcommitments. Any recommendations on how to coach teams to be more realistic? So, yeah, so it sounds like you are not able to finish, not because you are prevented by organizational design. You are unable to finish because you're multitasking, you're task switching, you are committing to more things you can do, or above and beyond your capacity. It seems like you are on the heavy pressure and on the heavy gun. This isn't really, sounds like it's not a technical challenge. It's not an organizational design challenge. It's not an organizational design just from a standpoint, you're missing needed intellectual assets and skill set. It's the organizational design problem where your team or multiple teams feel that they must deliver, they are obligated to deliver as per hard expectations and as hard plan. Skeptics, yeah, absolutely. I would imagine PMO would be a big skeptic to what I'm saying now. I would expect, you know, people that are local optimized, like maybe first line management that is not willing to give up autonomy and self-management would be skeptical. Of course, there are many stories, right, to share. But again, overcommitment is typically because there is a gap, there is vacuum between people that do work and people that request work, right? And those translation layers, those conduits that sit in between, managers, people are responsible for regs and for metrics and for reporting. They commit on behalf of people that do work. It's gonna, of course, exacerbate if you have vendor engagement situation, because as we know, people that do work and people that are engaged with client companies are not the same people, right? And you just don't know who works offshore behind the iron curtain, behind the wall. That's the problem. Let me just quickly read. There's a post from Peter. In principle, I agree with what you say regards to component teams that have the skills to complete it. There are some exceptions I would suggest, for example, where you require such special skills that is in financially prohibitive to have multiple people with those skills. I would say it's the minors. Yeah, so we can probably, and I'm happy if you want to speak on the open channel, Pete, by all means, you can state it, state your views, but you definitely need, when we say we need people with multiple skills, it does not mean we say we have to we have to abolish individuals that have deep expertise and knowledge in a specific skill set or domain. That's not what we're saying. We're not trying to be dichotomous. You know what a false dichotomy? If you don't call me tonight, I'm gonna kill myself. It doesn't have to be that drastic, right? You may need to have people that have very deep skill set in a specific domain. In large scale Scrum, for example, we leverage these people to become mentors and teachers as opposed to perfectionist doers that are fully accountable, responsible for, oh, don't touch it, I'm going to do it. There's a old Chinese proverb, give men a fish, you're going to feed them for a day. You teach them how to fish, you're going to feed them forever. So the whole philosophy behind this, and that's what we refer to in large scale Scrum as mentorship. We have to let people own as opposed to rent from others. So teach them. And of course, if they bump into a hard block, into a brick wall, then maybe an expert will come in and help and fix. But don't make this into de facto that if I have a component problem that I cannot touch today, I will not be able to touch it tomorrow either, because there's a person responsible for it. Financially, of course, that's a separate conversation. You may not be able to have every person who is a super skilled in a specific domain. I usually say it's not true to say that all great Java developers are in Boston and all great SQL people are in Bangalore. I think we can find good people in SQL and in Java, both in Boston and in Bangalore. But again, if there are some skills that are very hard to find, I can imagine that those would be more expensive people. Then turn them the right way, turn them into teachers and mentors. Don't see any question marks, so wonder if there are any more questions perhaps. So let me just scroll up for a second and see if there's anything there. Are there examples of an undone department names? DevOps? I'm not sure. So any department or any team that is responsible for, or integration team or deployment team or integration manager or release train engineer is another role who is responsible for releasing on behalf of teams. That role is it's a classic example. He or she is a classic representative of undone department. right? And if you have the whole team of release engineers, whether it's a train engineer or a boat engineer or a car engineer, doesn't matter. I just, make a bit of irony or with the term itself. This responsibility should reside with the team, not with an individual. And if such person exists today, and if they're so great at what they do, turn them into mentors and teachers. Do not make them into bottlenecks. Speaking financials, right? And Pete, thank you for bringing this up, because this is probably a valid point. Imagine this bottleneck picks up his bags and leaves tomorrow to a different company. Now you just created vacuum. No one can touch that, part of the cycle. No one is able to release. So you end up, piling up this code base, piling up these undone features, and then what? It's a pretty costly proposition. It's a pretty risky proposition. Something about Daniel Pink, which, whatever it is, I strongly recommend reading the book. Thank you, Pete, again. It's the great book. And there's a book drive, and there's also, in every training I run, like a bigger training, I always play RSA Animate by Daniel Pink. That's probably related to the subject of, to the topic of perks, bonuses, financial rewards, individual performance, all that stuff. All the way to the top, Ravir, is there a correlation between types of team versus happiness of the team? If so, how do we measure this happiness? Don't know. I mean, we can measure, we can use any arbitrary metric to measure a team's happiness, like introduce like a happiness factor of some sort. But it's a probably much deeper question. If we look at the component team, most likely there's going to be a component manager. There will be a top-down organizational command and control. There will be an element of I'm great and you're not. There will be an element of internal competition. There will be an element of trying to compete for the same pool of monetary incentives. Very subjective. So with that, I would expect. I'm not sure, but some people are happy about that. Most people I've met, they are not so happy. At least they're not so comfortable. Is local optimization a necessary evil? Local optimization, just to make sure we understand the term, the meaning of the term. If XYZ, let's say I'll take business analysis. If I'm a business analyst and the only thing I can do is to write BRDs or to write agile stories, right? I mean, I'm digressing a little bit into irony again. Then I will be very, very locally optimized to the best I can to make sure that there are many, many more stories in the backlog. And even to the extent that they are refined, granularly split and refined way out until, maybe until the next 5, 7, 8, maybe 20 sprints. I'm great at what I do. I'm local optimized to write stories, irrelevant of the fact that time is ticking and my product owner may not care about it. Is it necessary evil? Today it may be. It might be necessary evil if you build a team, added to it a business analyst who doesn't have any other skills but to write and analyze. Now, today is a necessary evil. See if this is the same case in 5 sprints. And if so, if no one else on the team picked up analytical capability, and if a business analyst spent no time learning something else other than analysis and writing, then this initial and necessary evil should be rightfully coined as unnecessary evil, and you should be less tolerant to that. Because now you have a team that looks at the surface as a cross-functional team with lots of handovers and local optimization internal. There was a question from Ravir again. So the question is, what is your recommendation to make the process better? By having technology-based solution, any minor changes? So again, this is a much bigger conversation. How do you come to this? How do you, if this is a question of how to go from component teams into a feature teams, of course, in large-scale Scrum, takes a couple of months worth of prep work. And this is the prep phase that we usually recommend and go through with less adoptions. And again, we're not trying to blow the entire organization out of the sky. Large scale Scrum product group is usually, 2 to 8 teams, which is roughly up to 70 people, just on the technology side. So it's very doable with prep work and proper senior management support. Probably a separate conversation. Natalie, Agile Story, smiling. Not sure that's not a question, but I'm happy to share mine if you wish. Local optimization is always one of the costs of system optim. Well, the more you optimize a part, the whole becomes more. Yeah, I would agree with the statement by Russell Arkoff. When you optimize locally and do not think about the whole, you most likely will sub-optimize globally. There was a great video I play in training a lot. It's the Pentagon Wars. It's the piece that is very ironic about building the Bradley fighting machine that looked nothing but a tank, because very local optimized engineers were competing to perfect in their respective domain. Very thin body armor, very heavy, too many unnecessary, useless weapons, unable to carry personnel, you name it. Multiple local optimizations amplified, translating into very low global systemic optimization of the entire product. Ping me offline, I'll share this very funny video with you. We are actually on the hour, folks, and I suspect people are going to start dropping. So I'm going to thank you all for joining today. I will try to record this and put it to the cloud if you wish to replay or to share with your colleagues. And look out for upcoming events on large scale from New York City. There are some pretty interesting topics coming up with some of my colleagues from Hong Kong and from Belgium in the next couple of weeks. Okay. All the best, everyone. Thank you. If there are no more questions, and if there are, feel free to ping me offline. Cheers.
Eugene.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Cheers.